Cool. So I think without further ado, we're going to invite Julian. He's going to tell us a bit about himself, and then he's going to present his slides.
Okay, so let me bring Julian to the stream.
Hey, hi everyone. Thanks so much, Joey. I'm glad to be here. It's such an honor to join you for this first GraphQL Nairobi meetup. And yeah, I'm gonna be talking about generating GraphQL queries. I'll share a bit more once I'm sharing my screen, but yeah, I hope to inspire you to build the next great GraphQL tool with my talk.
Great. Take it away.
Sure, I'll share my screen and I'll start. Let's see, I'm sharing my screen now. And you should be looking at the title of the talk, which is Dynamic GraphQL, from types to ASTs. There's a website URL with the talk, so feel free to check it out. And there's also my Twitter handle there, which is hard to show when links are underlined. It has some underlines first and last. But let's get started. First of all, yeah, I'm Julian. I'm so glad to be here. And I need to say I'm kind of addicted to GraphQL. In what sense? I love to build stuff with GraphQL, stuff that helps you build stuff. So mainly tools. I wrote an open source book about GraphQL a couple of years ago. Been working at GraphCMS, which is a headless CMS that provides a GraphQL API since 2018, so some years ago. And on the side, I also build stuff with GraphQL. There's API Live, my side project, which lets you build internal apps with GraphQL. And I also have some weekend hacks. For example, a no-code UI for GraphQL APIs, which is called GraphQL Admin. So I'm kind of like GraphQL. You could say I'm addicted. Yeah, so that's all nice, but what is this talk about, you might ask? And I'm glad you did, or I did. So first of all, I'm gonna dissect some popular tools in our GraphQL ecosystem to maybe guess a bit about how they work and how they leverage dynamic GraphQL queries and schemas. Then I'll share some tricks I've learned over the years writing this type of code that generates GraphQL queries and schemas. And lastly, I really want to encourage you to build the next one. We all love these tools, and you have all that it takes to build the next one. So a couple of prerequisites. Just a heads up, this is not a hardcore technical talk. I won't delve deep into code because that's hard, and you should do that after the talk because I will inspire you and give you some general tips and tricks. But still, you need some basic familiarity with GraphQL. So let's define some things first. So what's GraphQL? It's a transport layer tool to build APIs and clients. There are many definitions, but use it mainly to build APIs and clients. And there is a thing called a GraphQL schema, which is basically a lot of types describing the data that you can query. Like, here's what the API gives the consumers. And that takes us to what's a GraphQL query. And I would say it's a document describing what to get. So that's what the clients use to say, hey, this is what I need right now from the API. So you select a bit of it. And now we can get started. I call this standing on the shoulder of giants. And I'm gonna be taking a look. I look at some GraphQL tools and maybe try to guess how they handle dynamic GraphQL. Let's start with Prisma, which are the hosts of this meetup. Let's ask 3 questions about it. Like, what is it? It's a database ORM. And but I don't really like acronyms. I think they're great, but they need more explanation. So what does that mean? It makes querying databases that easy. It's really easy. It's a great tool. I use it on my projects, and it really simplifies querying data, inserting data, and migrations. So how does it use GraphQL, right? And I'm sorry, Prisma people. I don't work with the Prisma inside of Prisma, so this is just a guess. And feel free to correct me after the talk. So how does it work? You write some simple Prisma schemas, and Joey will dive deeper into that on the next talk. So don't worry if I go through it too fast. But you write this really easy to write and readable Prisma schemas. And I guess it converts them to GraphQL schemas, giving you a nice type-safe SDK to interact with databases. So I think that leverages GraphQL. Again, this is just a guess, but it's also a nice thought exercise of how can you use GraphQL in there. So it converts those functions into GraphQL queries, and having GraphQL queries is a great middle step to generate the final SQL queries. So as you can see, it can leverage dynamic GraphQL by creating schemas, creating queries, and transforming those queries to SQL. Now let's take a look at another tool, GraphCMS. This is where I work. It's my 3rd year there. What is it? A headless CMS, a GraphQL headless CMS. And like without acronyms now, it basically gives you a nice drag and drop API builder so that you can build your sites with your favorite tools. And it also gives editors a nice UI to manage all the content. And how does it use dynamic GraphQL? Well, when you are on the drag and drop builder and you perform actions, create models, create fields, it generates a GraphQL schema on the based on your actions. So you have a fully fledged GraphQL API without writing any code. And there's also that content editing experience, which it creates by leveraging that GraphQL schema that you generated dynamically. And it shows a UI on top of it. So it creates queries and a UI on top of them. Now let's take a look at Apollo client. I'll take a look at 4 tools. This is the 3rd one. What is it? Declarative data fetching client. And I didn't use any acronyms there, so I guess I could give a bit of more of an explanation. So it basically makes front-end developers' data requirements really easy. It's super easy to interact with GraphQL APIs. Just describe what you need, and then it handles fetching that. And how does it use dynamic GraphQL? Well, the code is open source, so feel free to check it out. It's really cool, really well written with a lot of tests. But one of the cool things that it does is that it gets a GraphQL schema and it creates, it normalizes that data into a client-side cache, which you could use to have offline queries, to have optimistic responses, a bunch of cool stuff. And so a cache uses, you can customize this, but the cache is a key value store, basically, in memory key value store, with the types and IDs of your data and the values. And lastly, let's take a look at Gatsby, which is used to be a static sites generator, but you can basically create a bunch of dynamic sites, and it provides a lot of great tools for that. And I didn't use any acronyms there as well. So it really allows front-end developers to build really performant sites and applications. And it uses GraphQL heavily. It creates a GraphQL schema at build time. So it's really cool because it creates that GraphQL schema based on any data, whether it's local, remote, it could come from anywhere. And since it generates a GraphQL schema, you can query that schema from your pages. And it's really cool because it basically infers the type of the GraphQL schema that it should generate by taking a look at the data. So it's another way of leveraging dynamic GraphQL. And so yeah, that's a bit of a thought experiment to maybe appreciate more the tools we use day to day as developers, because they do some really cool complex stuff thanks to GraphQL, the schema, and its type system. So having said that, I wanted to give you some tips and tricks and techniques I used to write that kind of code for some years now. As I said, I build tools on the side, and I'm going to give you an example of a tool just to show how you can leverage dynamic GraphQL. So it's called GraphQL Admin. It's a no-code UI for GraphQL APIs. So what I wanted to do is, like, you can point this web page to any GraphQL APIs, and it can create an admin interface for it, like tables and forms and everything, and you don't need to learn GraphQL. You just point it to the API and it generates queries by fetching the schema. So that's how it leverages Dynamic GraphQL. It fetches the schema, gets the top level query fields, shows that in the sidebar. Feel free to check it out if you haven't. And it generates a GraphQL query for every one of those fields. So you don't even need to know GraphQL. You can edit the queries, obviously, but it's really a great way of showing how to generate a query out of nothing, just a schema, a URL. So a couple of techniques I used to do that. And you could see them as almost general programming advice. So I also think that's really cool. And building tools gives you that experience. So how to write dynamic GraphQL. Go for the interface first. Like you will write functions which should have clear inputs and outputs. You should leverage unit tests. They are really your friends in making sure things are working the way you expect. And if they are your friends, then types are your bodyguards or like best friends. I don't know how to call them, but you should leverage types. And in this case, TypeScript, which really gives you a bunch of confidence that you're building the right thing. And finally, leverage GraphQL ASTs for the implementation. And I'll show you how in a bit. Now for the first part. Focus on the interface first of the function. In this case, we have a function that generates a query, like a GraphQL query, based on a schema and field. You can pass it some configuration, like what you want to create, if it's just scalars, just enums, just variables, or a combination of them. So it's really good to think about what it should get. In this case, the most important parameters are a schema and a field. And this whole thing about dynamic GraphQL may seem daunting at first, but you shouldn't worry about that. You should really start by the end result, and then you will get there. How? Well, you should also think about unit tests and types, and then write the body. And it's just iterating until you get it right. So let's have an example of a unit test for the function I showed you previously. As you can see in this case, we have some schema that we got from a JSON file. And then this test verifies that it generates a query with just objects. So you can see here it's a basic example where you give a field, in this case, the asset field, and you tell it to generate a query. And then you expect that the query looks like this. So again, we're focusing on inputs and outputs and not about how the function works first. And yeah, just a tip, you don't need to hit external APIs on your test. You can just save their introspection result as JSON and use that in your tests. That's a good way of not depending on external APIs. So now that we have an example of a unit test, let's take a look at how types can help us build dynamic GraphQL, our bodyguards in this case. So as you can see, this function now has types for the arguments that it receives and for the result that it should give out. And as you will see, I got these types from GraphQL.js, which is the library you'll be using the most if you want to generate dynamic queries. And yeah, so it provides types as well as a bunch of utilities to create GraphQL queries and schemas. But in this case, if you're creating a schema out of your function, or if you're receiving, then you should type that because it really helps you not mess up with a lot of things we can mess up on our day-to-day creating these complex functions. And if you're creating queries, then you should return a document node, which is just the type that represents a query, but in memory. And having said that about types and in memory, you should leverage GraphQL ASTs for the body of your functions. You might be tempted to just create strings, which is good for simple cases. Like you could use string interpolation to create a GraphQL query, but you will see that that doesn't scale over time. So it's great to know the API of GraphQL.js and know what's an operation definition, a document, variable definition, and that's how it represents GraphQL queries internally. So feel free to check out the docs, which are really amazing. Yeah. And yeah, so this is an example of a function that creates a document. And don't worry if it seems complex, as long as you have the correct types for your function and your tests verify the end result, you will get there. There are many different ways of writing these functions, and you will use your own style to get there. So I'm gonna get to the third part of this talk, which is really to encourage you to create these kinds of tools. Don't just be a consumer of them, and it's great to be a consumer of these tools. I am a consumer of these tools. They make our lives easier. The development experience that GraphQL enables is just out of this world. I'm so glad to be using them day to day, but it's also so fun to create them. So I really want you to go ahead and build the next great or small GraphQL tool, because they really improve our day-to-day development experience. So yeah, I'm so grateful for the people that do create them, and I really want you to be the next one. So thanks again for watching. Thanks to the organizers, and yeah, just wanted to invite you to next time I'm giving a talk about testing GraphQL APIs with my colleague Bruno at the next GraphQL Conf. So I'd love for you to be there. It's a free conference, so I want you to be there and enjoy all of the great talks by our community. And that is a wrap. Thanks for watching. I'm gonna stop sharing there. Hi again, guys.
Hi. Very nice talk. I really like, yeah, I really like because of how GraphQL works. Some of the tools, that have been the community has been able to, to build around that, because it's really, really powerful. So I think guys can always, try to figure out how to build some nice tools. One of my favorite tools that I use is the GraphQL CodeGen, especially when you're, writing like front end and stuff, because it's like a contract that you have between your server and your client, so you can be able to generate type safe queries and or hooks just to get your data. So it's really nice to see this.
Makes your life so easy as a developer, right? To have the confidence of knowing what those functions return and how to use that in your code. Yeah, it's an amazing tool made by the guild, and they make a lot of awesome GraphQL tools. So props to them.
Yeah, they're an awesome team. Great. Please feel free to ask any questions on the chat. I believe Julian will be hanging around, with us for the next maybe 30 minutes or so. So if you have any questions for Julian, check out some of their slides and the links that he shared. You can also reach out to him on Twitter. But thanks. Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you, Joey, for everything. And yeah, I'll be around to answer any questions. So.